Sıradaki Keynote konuşmacımız Profesör Doktor Mehmet ASUTAY. Mehmet ASUTAY, İstanbul Üniversitesi Maliye Bölümünde lisans ve yüksek lisansını bitirdikten sonra University of York'ta postgraduate diplomasını Economic and Social Policy Analysis üzerine aldı. Ayrıca University of Leicester'de Politik Ekonomi bölümünde Searching for Economic and Political Nexus, Political Business Cycles and the Impact of Politics on the Macroeconomy in Turkey başlıklı teziyle doktora derecesini aldı. Şu anda Durham Üniversitesi School of Government and International Affairs bölümünde İslam ekonomisi, bankacılık ve finans, Orta Doğu ve İslam ülkelerinde ekonomi, politik ve ekonomik gelişim konularında dersler vermektedir. ASUTAY ayrıca Durham İslami Finans Programı'nın, İslami Finans Master Programı'nın ve Durham İslami Finans Yaz Okulu'nun koordinatörlüğünü yapmaktadır. Review of Islamic Economics dergisinde editörlük, American Journal of Islamic Social Sciences dergisinde yardımcı editörlük görevini yürütmekte ve Borneo Journal of Business and Economics'te dahil olmak üzere çeşitli akademik dergilerin yayın kurulunda yer almaktadır. Şimdi Sayın Mehmet ASUTAY'ı konuşmalarını yapmak üzere sahneye davet ediyorum.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I'm pleased to be here and with my deepest greetings to all the, as they in the Turkish will say, Hazirun, all the present. It is good to be here in Istanbul. I have been saying that I used to be very critical about Istanbul, not doing anything in Islamic finance over the many years, but it's good to see that now one after another conference is taking place in Istanbul. And Istanbul is aiming to become one of the important centers of Islamic finance as well as the entire country. A number of programs have started in different parts of Turkey, and it's good to see that Sakarya and Savat managed to come together to organize this particular conference. And my congratulations to colleagues involved in organizing. Of course, it is fantastically important to have the CEOs of some of the Islamic banks as well as the leading institution, the Participation Banking Association, present here, which shows the commitment of the Turkish environment given on Islamic finance. As we have listened as well, recent developments that have taken place in Turkey, in terms of even the presidential office directly involving in Islamic financial development, and these are indeed enjoyable times. My today's presentation, I'm not going to go into what is happening in the industry, but I thought my colleagues, Abdul Qadir and Iqbal and Nagoka, they have talked about provided different perspectives to understand what is happening in the industry and beyond. My objective perhaps as the last speaker of the session to shift the debate on more on the academic research and imagination of research. What are we planning, what we want to do? One way or another over the years, even in this particular year, I was involved in organizing a quite large number of conferences in different parts of the world on Islamic finance, which has given me the opportunity to look into what is available, what is coming into conferences in terms of research. I think in the last 2 or 3 months, I must have read around 600, 700, 800 abstracts coming to the conferences that I was involved. And reading through those abstracts has given me the opportunity to map out what is happening or what should be happening, and how much we are expanding new horizons or we are sticking to what is available around us. With my colleague, with Professor Nagoka, we ran a joint workshop with Kyoto University, and we were very careful in determining the title, what the title of that particular workshop should be. And Professor Kosigi has suggested that it should be New Horizons. And that is perhaps an important issue. Of course, the question Islamic economics and finance is new So why new horizon on top of something new? And that's a valid question. However, the practice of Islamic finance in terms of practice as well as research suggests that perhaps that new paradigm is really necessary, because somehow the new paradigm that we thought to be somehow moved into a different direction, and therefore the importance of looking at the new horizons. New horizons in terms of our research, but at the same time practices. Because somehow we are terribly confining ourselves to one particular institutional formation, that is banking. I mean, we have CEOs here, and my full respect to Islamic banking. It has achieved amazing. Despite all the political hurdles, on top of all the difficulties that we had, all over the world, Islamic finance has made amazing achievements, Islamic banking in particular. But perhaps rather than confining the arrays of institutions that is available for us with banking, perhaps we could expand our horizon and to see, either with the participation as well of the Islamic banks, or without their direct contribution, whether can we come up with different institutional forms. These are important questions for us to pose, and therefore we need critical research. Because so far, what we have seen, unfortunately, the academia have been lagging behind the banking sector. We have been trying to understand what they are doing, but we have failed to provide a critical mass thinking in terms of shaping what they should be able to as well do. We have been criticizing Islamic banking activities, but at the same time, we have failed to provide a theoretical frame, for instance, in which Islamic banks would be able to operate, as well as perhaps fulfill our expectations. And therefore, in this particular session, being an educator, being an academic myself, being a researcher myself, I thought I could reflect on these particular issues. I hope you will find that interesting. Of course, research is an important aspect of knowledge development. And when we conduct research, of course, one of the particular issues that is important for us, we all have curiosities. Some of us perhaps moved into Islamic finance because we strongly felt that it is a faith issue. But some of us moved into Islamic finance out of an intellectual conviction. And that's an important issue for us. The intellectual conviction beyond just faith, how we can create that critical mass is an important task in front of us. So the curiosity, Islamic finance and economics is a curiosity for us. Of course, individual curiosities has to be responded, but at the same time, why we have all these curiosities? Because we want to make a difference. We want to make a change. We want to contribute to the development of societies. We want to reflect on those research so that something new, something different, something better can be established. And that is the whole objective of research. And what we see all over the world, in particular in Islamic banking and finance, there are plenty of examples how a large number of conventional banks came together, established think tanks. Okay, in London, a number of universities, they have think tanks which are directly sponsored by large banks, because the whole objective is to look into how it can be developed. You can be sarcastically would say that, well, despite all those efforts, they failed. Yes, I do accept. But beyond that, the research is the essential part of developing knowledge. In particular, when we look at the Islamic civilization, the importance of searching knowledge, even in the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, is particularly important for us to consider. Therefore, the important issue with Islamic finance, when we start all the centers, when we start all the programs, the important issue, what we want to aim at. Are we only producing children to go and work in Islamic banks, which is important, of course, but if that is the only aim, then we have difficulty. because we want to generate, we want to contribute, as Nagoka was present, a new generation, development of a new generation who can make a difference in those Islamic banks they are working, but at the same time contributing to the larger environment. Therefore, how the intellectual capacity can be developed beyond going into a bank and working and just touching the buttons and doing the transactions. And hence the importance of the reflective and critical thinking that is unfortunately missing in most of the programs in the world, Islamic finance programs in particular. And therefore the importance of creating an independent research conduct. How we can contribute an independent research as a skill, how we can develop so that an individual even goes and works in an Islamic bank will be able to locate a problem and try to solve that problem beyond just replicating and mimicking what is done there. So the institutional capacities of Islamic banks can also be created and expanded through a critical thinking that can be provided. And therefore, our objective should be in research and development how we can unpack ideas. Okay, whatever we have around us, even that's an Islamic knowledge, unpacking that and to see the assumptions, the building blocks, so that how we can go into the new horizons and create new knowledge. And that has been the important part of the story. Islamic banking is an amazing opportunity for us because for the first time in the last few hundred years, knowledge is being transferred. Knowledge as well as experience is being transferred from east to the west. Because until now, the entire knowledge has been coming from west to the east. But this time, even the most secular countries of the west, they consult Sharia scholars to understand how Islamic finance can be conducted. So it's an amazing opportunity in terms of creating knowledge and then transferring that knowledge. Therefore, when we look at the whole idea of Islamic economics and finance, is very much knowledge-oriented rather than the market-driven. While Islamic banking in current practice perhaps is market-driven, but when we look at the post-colonial period, 1940s, 50s, 60s, these intellectuals, these business people coming together because they have a curiosity, how to make a difference through Islamic identity. And that contributed the whole idea of the emergence of what today we call Islamic economics and finance. And in their imagination, amazing imagination, we can be critical of their writing, but in that imagination, what is important is to create an alternative paradigm. So in that imagination, when you look at it, is not only how I can move capital from one place to another by using an Islamic metaphors, but no, creating an alternative paradigm. Because having that imagination of individual, imagination of human at the center by using Islamic normative rule. Therefore, when we look at its emergence, very much a human-centered development, rather than institutions, even rather than banking, it's very much how we can contribute to the lives of every individuals on the street. Okay? What difference we can make it. And therefore the criticism raised against capitalism, nationalism, and socialism, and etc., it failed. It failed to bring human to the center of understanding of the economic activity. And therefore it's a paradigm rather than a metaphor only, just shifting capital from one place to another to conduct a transaction. And therefore within that framework, within that paradigm, Islamic finance is considered to be the financing tool of achieving that particular paradigm. And therefore, as Nagoka referred, the Polanyian term, Islamic economics finance movement very much emerged to respond as a counter-hegemony. And being a counter-hegemony with the objective of rescuing land, labor, capital, human, from the oppressiveness of the systems that we have around us. how individuals therefore can be essentialized in the process. That was the question as a counter-hegemonic question put forward by Islamic economics as part of that double movement. How a new modes of productions can be created, how distribution can be arranged in the society, who owns what, why, how long, and etc. Those were the questions that were raised and essentialized. And therefore, knowledge development also aimed at creating a new knowledge base, a new capabilities, so that the difference can be expressed. Okay, and however, what we have seen over the years, this imagination, this larger, remained as incomplete project, because somehow with the Islamic banking become at the center of all understanding, the research, thinking, and activities in relation to Islamic economics unfortunately pushed behind the doors. And therefore, in order to have, as mentioned in the morning sessions as well, in order to have that broader understanding of how we locate individual and human in the entire universe, we need to be able to go back. We should be going back to that original imagination and bring back together. Yes, Islamic banking should be working together that Islamic economic understanding. Because the problems that we have around us is so amazingly large, it won't be easy, it won't be possible even to solve only just focusing on banking. So how we can expand that? At the same time, how we can get states as well, develop public policies in line with the Islamic economic understanding, so that we can respond to the problems of the people on the street. And therefore, when we look at research, after those initial years, very much remained repetitive, very much pragmatic, and very much prescriptive, in the sense that original or the initial post-colonial writings were by definition prescriptive, because it was trying to establish a picture showing to us what Islamic economics and finance should be. But it was very critical on the existing systems, capitalism, nationalism, socialism, and etc. as paradigms. However, when I see the new generations coming and still replicating what has been done by the previous generation, it gives me concerns about the new horizons, the critical knowledge that we want to develop. And that's an important question that we need to understand, how, despite the effort, how or why we cannot put efforts to create new frames or contribute to the expansion of the original imagination, and why we have to confine ourselves within a classical analysis and frame. And therefore, we have to go beyond this particular prescriptive understanding. And in order to understand that, or in order to verify that, in order to justify that, when I look at the Quranic methodology, even when we look at the whole Islamic methodology, you start with the Shahada. I bear witness. And we do not say that I believe that there is a God. We say that I bear witness. Because bearing witness directly refers to an informed understanding of what it is. However, belief doesn't require that. And if you look at the Islamic methodology, it directly would say, I bear witness, which implies that I have seen, and therefore I accept it. And the same, this critical understanding, this capacity, critical capacity, in terms of witness, for instance, in the Islamic methodology, directly tells us that it is knowledge beyond information. So you see, you analyze, you understand, and therefore that analytical conviction is an important issue for us. And therefore I feel that we need to develop at this critical stage, because as Dr. Qadir presented some data, Islamic banking perhaps is not necessarily growing as much as we expected. So it is a critical stage for new horizons, therefore. Therefore, we need to develop critical thinking in developing new instruments for Islamic banking, so that they can reach out the masses, okay? develop new institutional forms beyond banks, so that larger parts of the societies, in Muslim as well as non-Muslim societies, can be brought in. And therefore, it is important to develop this critical thinking as an Islamic methodology, as well as the reality that we have around us. And in particular, referring to Islamic economics in its origin, how it was very much, and it is still a knowledge-driven rather than a market-driven reality in its core, and therefore we have to look into how we can develop new capabilities. So therefore, when we look at the development trajectories of Islamic finance itself, what we have seen that it is successful. It's a successful commercial proposition. Perhaps it is not necessarily directly contributing to the ends that the founding fathers were imagining, or what as an academic I want to see, but it has managed to go beyond borders despite the difficulties. And of course there are particular reasons. The oil monies, oil wealth played an important role. The Malaysian government, as well as some other proactive governments until recently, involved directly to make it, to provide a particular foundation. But when we look at how much it is authentic, sahih, in terms of what they are doing, what you want to achieve, but at the same time how much it is perhaps just an Islamic metaphor, just moving capital from one place to another, without directly contributing to individual lives perhaps, without producing a different consequence. Perhaps intention is Islamic, intention is fantastically acceptable, but the consequence perhaps is not necessarily what is expected of it. And therefore these are important questions that we have to raise, to look at. And these are important questions as well posed by the previous generations. When we look at Ibn Qayyim, for instance, when he's writing on Maqasid al-Sharia many years ago, many centuries ago, and he was very much critical about the way we might use ruse or hila to play around to overcome interest. And that is the knowledge that I'm referring. That is the typical treatment of knowledge even in centuries ago. Therefore, perhaps we have to look into how that substance can be developed. Then when we look at research so far, we have theoretical studies. Unfortunately, it's terribly rare. Since perhaps one of the latest books in Islamic economics, it was Chapra, 2000 and 2004 Naqvi, and since there isn't any substantial book on Islamic economics. Conceptual studies, again in Islamic economics and finance, the conceptual studies mainly remain within the mainstream economics and finance. And it's very limited as well, despite being conceptual, despite being or remaining within the mainstream. Empirical studies, amazing numbers. We have all become empiricists, every one of us. I do not have any problem with empirical analysis. It is essential, it is important for us to gather data, to analyze, to understand what happens. But if we put all the eggs in the same basket, that is empirical analysis, then what happens to the rest? Because if you do not have a particular theoretical framework, then everyone using the available methods and methodologies and doing empirical studies, then what happens? What happened to paradigm? What happened to framework? And these are important questions as researchers we have to put forward. And perhaps practitioners, they have to think as well the importance of research and development in terms of establishing new horizons for their own institutions. And therefore, perhaps they have to encourage a research center, and perhaps like in conventional finance, they should come out with sponsorships and fundings as they have been doing, but perhaps not necessarily in a very systematic manner. But having said that, I do not have any pessimism for that. I'm very optimistic, I'm very passionate, things are happening, but it's happening slow. And we do not have time to lose, unfortunately. And therefore, my worry is how we can push the boundaries in order to establish new capabilities so that the new horizons can be shaped, perhaps not necessarily reached, but at least can be shaped. So therefore, when I look at stages of development in terms of industry as well as the research, what we see perhaps, this is a structural problem that we have in front of us. Because initially, the first Islamic bank, I essentialize a lot, I praise a lot, Midgang, 1963, Egypt is a social bank, therefore is very much credit union type, but it was very much an institutional mimicry. A very noble person, Ahmed Najjar, studies in in Germany and obsessed with the development and success of Germany, and understand that the social banking system in Germany has certain impact in that. So the whole idea was how that could be replicated in Egypt. So what we had, an institutional mimicry. And then that institutional mimicry, with the creation of Islamic commercial banks, with the Dubai Islamic Bank being the first commercial Islamic bank in 1975, then it turned into an hybridity. Islam is used to shape the nature of the transaction, although most of the transactions perhaps, at least inconsequentially, remain the same. Then of course we had the fantastic opportunity of diffusion. Islamic banks went all over the world. It is everywhere, on the high streets of major cities all over the world. So we had the mimicry of conventional institutions, then we moved into conventional instruments because of the lack of research. Unfortunately, rather than developing new capabilities, new instruments, new transactions, we decided to mimic the instruments. And that's the failure of research on the academic side, but at the same time, banks and financial institutions not putting enough emphasis on research. Therefore, that mimicry. And therefore, quite large number of Muslims are still questioning, despite the information that we have around us, how Islamic banks. And that is because we have not developed the research capabilities to develop new instruments as well as institutions. Therefore, the convergence, we are talking of convergence, not going to touch upon the whole, the convergence issues, talking about the Sharia arbitrage, as well as other convergence issues. But in the end, we started with mimicking conventional instruments, ending up with hybrid instruments offering. Therefore, in the end, what we have, a mimicry Islamic bank and financial structures, convergence of conventional finance sector towards IBFs have not taken place. In other words, we were expecting that Islamic banks, being a fantastically ethical institutions, would be example, would be moral compass to conventional banks so that they can develop some ethical qualities. But unfortunately, the convergence has taken place the other way around. And in the end, with the competition, of course, heightened competition, with global competition, further conversions are taking place so that Islamic banks can expand their bases, their opportunity spaces. And that's an important issue for us to consider. Now, the important issue, of course, we use the term, when you go to Islamic finance conferences, you hear about mimicry, for instance, okay? But what is the meaning of it? It is very much mimicry. Through the mimicry process, you evolve to share the perceived characteristics with another group, with another model. In other words, you as an individual, you as an institution, try to become like the other. So therefore, the evolution is driven by selective action of signal and receiver. So in this case, what we have, conventional banks gives the signal, and we become the receiver of the signal, of that signal out of competition, of course. So therefore, when we look at Islamic banks, has evolved to get similar through the mimicry process in terms of their instruments, operations, and institutionalization, and share the perceived characteristics of conventional banks. And because in this, Islamic banks remain as the signal receiver rather than giving the opportunity space, rather than expanding the opportunity space for other banks and financial institutions to develop capabilities in ethicality, for instance. And therefore, convergence and hybridity, these are important issues for us. What is important perhaps for us to look into, as you would see in the highlighted section, is the dimension of an artificial or forced union. Okay, and it's very much, this is the colonizing process. Because when we look at the whole idea of post-colonization, with the emergence of Islamic economics, the idea was to develop authentic forms of economics and finance. But now, with the signaling process, unfortunately that colonization process through the institutionalization is taking place, intellectually as well as institution. Because what happens in the end with convergence and hybridity, if you look at the highlighted section, hybridity have to renounce the dream of ambition. In other words, you become so content with what you have around you, then you give up all your imagination, the dream of ambition of rediscovering, because the whole idea with Islamic economics and finance movement was to rediscover a new imagination in a very authentic sense. But the more you converge, the more hybridity, then you have to renounce. You have to give up the idea of creating this imagination. And that is because that creates the laziness. You become adaptive into the process. And therefore, hybridity is not the solution, unfortunately, because it creates tension. And that's the tension we have. But that's the tension, perhaps, therefore, we have not been able to bring larger segments of societies into Islamic banking. In a country like Turkey, majority being Muslim, still in terms of engagement with Islamic bank, financial inclusiveness in terms of Islamic bank, we have not been. Yes, there have been plenty of political problems until recent times, but I think in the origin, this hybridity creates the problem as well. Why? Because you are losing in the process the categories that you have authentic for yourself, because then you merge into. And therefore the importance of transgressive power of symbolic hybrids to subvert categorical opposition. Because Islamic economics emerged as a particular categorical counter-hegemony, as an opposition to correct things, to rescue land, labor, capital, and human. But you are losing that in the process. And therefore, the last stage of that, of course, is mirroring. And mirroring happens subconsciously, because initially you mimic, then you become hybrid, then unfortunately you mirror. And that's, of course, the difficult part. And it is therefore our objective, perhaps, before moving into mirroring, with research and development, how we can get out of that process. Because with the mirroring, of course, you become very much similar to what you have in front of you. Because when you look at a mirror, you see yourself. So with the mirroring process, you replicate what is in front of you. And therefore, that is the last stage of complete annihilation in the process. And through that, of course, you lose the identity. However, the whole idea with Islamic economics and finance was to raise that identity. And that's the process it happens. Because normally, in developing institutional forms, you would have your ontology, and that ontology would produce particular institutions. But in our case, with Islamic banking, what happened, rather than the ontology, the revealed knowledge, producing a particular institution, banking, financial institutions, what we have done, we have taken from here and Islamized in the process through negotiating, okay? And that is the difficulty perhaps we have. Rather than developing through that process, we have taken it into the process and Islamize. And that is perhaps the difficulty we have. And why this happened? That's the important question that I am posing. This happened because in 1960s, the Muslim world didn't have the necessary intellectual capabilities to be able to come up directly from this ontology to produce something. But over the last 40, 50 years, now we should be in a position to engage with such critical thinking to develop the capabilities that we need, so that perhaps rather than going through that circle, we should be able to produce direct institutional forms and instruments so that we can develop trust in the society. So that is the experience that we have. So what happens in research? When we look at research, of course, the whole idea is to develop authenticity, imitation, to develop authenticity. But what happened in the process, unfortunately, imitation is taking place in the research as well, and a lot of repetition. And we repeat a lot. And therefore, rather than looking into the authentic meaning and create an authentic understanding, rather than considering Islamic economics as an emerging science, what we are doing is just repeating, and therefore we are ending up what we call emergence pattern. Time is an issue, I have noticed that, and therefore I'll pass most of the stuff. But, so research so far. What is important, therefore, in order to be able to overcome the particular issues that we have in front of us, extensive and critical research that has to take place in emergent research in Islamic economics, Islamic political economy, moral economy, Islamic finance, and etc. When we look at, as I mentioned, most of our research in the last 10 years entirely empirical and can be terribly repetitive. My colleagues who have papers on this subject in this conference, they have to forgive me, but I'm fed up reading Islamic bank performance papers. Okay, the data is terribly limited. We are just repeating without doing anything else. Okay, and in every conference, you receive tens of papers on bank efficiency and bank performance. The objective is just repeating, so that we put something in our CV without considering what we really achieved in a paper. So that's an important issue that we have to discuss. And therefore, we have to look into how we can overcome this repetitiveness, developing perhaps into institutional forms. Of course, I do not have any problem with empirical research. And I wish we could go back. I'm recently in a conference. There was an English colleague. He presented a paper on corporate governance in banking sector in the British history. The guy had data for the last 300 years. It's an amazing opportunity. So you see what happened historically so that you can develop some patterns. Unfortunately, we don't have that. And therefore, I do not have a particular problem with empirical research. But as I mentioned in the beginning, if you put all the eggs in the same basket, and that basket is just repeating, it doesn't create any value added for us. And that's an important lesson that I want to take myself from this. And therefore, industry mimics and mirrors, but we, the researcher, we are supposed to be the one who should provide new horizons for banks, financial institutions, and other institutions. Unfortunately, we do the same. And that's the intellectual bottleneck that we have in the Muslim world in general, and Islamic banking and finance in particular. Therefore, our objective is how to push and overcome that bottleneck. So our objective, therefore, has to create networks, such as people here coming to this conference, create that network, create that critical mass, so that we can overcome the problems that we have in front of us. Okay, I'm going to miss the technicalities, but this empirical research dominating the scenery and theoretical research being terribly limited, it is indeed a worry. And because it doesn't bring innovation, okay, and because the data is not terribly long period, and it is terribly difficult to develop certain understanding in order to expand our horizon or imagination. Therefore, indeed it helps us to establish a pattern, but it doesn't help us to establish an emergence as a science, Islamic economics as an emergence. And of course, lack of analytical and critical thinking. Okay, we receive papers, we have an econometric modeling, the data is there, the results are there, but what's the meaning? Okay, we have failed to develop capacities, individuals giving meaning to data as well. And this is something that we have to look into. So having an econometric skill, we think that that's the enough bit. But so what? Because the question, when we conduct research, we respond to certain question. The what question, the how question, the why question, and the most important, so what? So that is where we push the boundaries into new horizons. And Islamic banking and finance, as well as Islamic economics, needs those boundaries, pushing boundaries, so that the better research environment can produce better institutional forms, better instruments for Islamic banking and finance. So the new paradigm that we are looking into requires this analytical and critical thinking that we are looking into in our teaching and research. And therefore we have to go beyond the repetitiveness that we have around us, or mimicry that we have in research as well. And just to give an example, although I have quite a number of examples, but the lunch is there, I know, I'm not going to take further, but that unblurred and unfrozen imagination that is important for us, such as microeconomics, the banking, we are doing banking and finance, is a microeconomics issue. And however, we haven't defined even what utility is. How many papers we have on the conceptual definition of what utility is in Islamic economics? So we are doing partnership, we are sharing, we have profit and loss sharing, but we haven't defined those concepts, okay? We have taken those entirely granted. We, as those people from the moral economy side, criticizing a lot Islamic banks, that they are not doing enough in terms of sharing, in terms of social development. But we failed as academics to define a particular social welfare function in which to define the role of banks and financial institutions. So we have to be honest with each other. So we failed in providing a particular framework, operational framework for Islamic banks to operate. Therefore, the convergence that we have has taken place. Therefore, it is time perhaps we have to move from words to constructs, put real efforts in research centers, proactively debate concepts, get concepts properly established and defined, so that we can provide a new paradigm, such as emergence. What is construct? What is emergence? What is new institutional sociology? Islamic economics and finance as an everyday practice. Because as I always say, before the banks, Islamic banks emerged as institutional forms in Anatolia as well as in every part of Muslim world, still people were doing Islamic financing. So these are important heritage for us to look into. I remember my grandfather telling me about cultivating the land through Mudaraba. Okay, they were doing it. So looking at all those practices, what we can develop out of those practices, for instance. Okay, Islamic economics and finance as relational economics. How the gift economy mentioned earlier in the presentation, okay, the reciprocity. Okay, in this land we have a particular practice, imaja, or ahilik as a system. Amazing experiences that we have looking into those issues and how we can develop. Hence, the issue therefore going beyond imitation, going beyond reputation, and creating an authenticity, creating an authentic understanding of the issues. There are some other issues that I want to discuss, but time is an issue. As I mentioned in the beginning, we need to look into ontological sources. We need to develop classical material, look into classical material. The historical practices, as I mentioned, the everyday practice, and then trying to reconstruct it. And that is the essential task we have in front of us. And therefore the importance of transdisciplinarity. Use all the disciplines, but come up with a particular methodology just for this, okay? Even going beyond multidisciplinarity, okay? Because multidisciplinarity imposes a particular methodology, go beyond that, because this area requires a new methodology. And therefore, by using all this, how we can come up with different ways of understanding what economics and finance should be. And hence, the importance, I wish I had time, for instance, just to discuss with you the whole emergence as a science, emergence as a practice. But I'm going to leave that, as time is an issue, as well as lunch there. But just to conclude, therefore, when we look at the whole institutions and the instruments, is what we see Islamic banking is very much an emergence pattern, doing the usual things but with different formulation. But our objective should be entirely new emergence. The practice is different, the way you make the practice is different as well, the methodology is different, authentic. That should be the objective that we have to look into. Therefore, with that transdisciplinary, how we can develop a particular understanding and methodology for Islamic economics and finance, so that we can overcome the problems that we have in front of us, but also give hope to people outside. Because knowledge is not only for individual interests, but using that knowledge to make other people's life better. And that's a responsibility upon us that we have to look into. And therefore, Islamic banking and finance should be shaped with such an understanding, and Islamic economics, a much broader imagination, has to be aimed at by each one of us, in particular by academics. As I always quote, as Rumi from this land would say, how pleasant is the flow without bullering and freezing. That non-bullering and non-freezing is an important. I can see that unfortunately we are going through that stagnation. Our minds have been frozen in relation to new horizons in Islamic economics and finance. So we have to look into how we can go beyond that, as it is time to say something new, something different, so that the better features can be established. And you may call me utopist and imaginary, but I'm sure that people, the founding fathers, is 1940s, 50s, 60s, they were called mad. Islamic economics and finance could not be possible. Even I remember on the BBC website, they were saying, referring to Islamic finance, Islamic banking as a voodoo economy. And now BBC has a constant section in their website on Islamic finance. So imaginations can be reality, and hope we can all contribute to that imagination. Thank you.
Profesör Doktor Mehmet Asutay'a teşekkür ediyoruz. Mehmet Asutay'a hediyelerini vermek üzere Ziraat Katılım Genel Müdürü Sayın Osman Arslan'ı sahneye davet ediyoruz.